What does it cost to underestimate someone? For one flight attendant, it cost her a career. For a multi-billion-dollar airline, it cost them everything. This isn't just a story about a mistaken identity or a viral video. This is the story of how a single act of prejudice against a 17-year-old boy in seat 2A triggered a corporate meltdown so catastrophic it wiped $4 billion from the stock market before the sun came up the next day. It's a story of hidden connections, devastating consequences, and the kind of hard karma that only real life can deliver. Buckle up because this flight gets turbulent. The air in the Etheria Airlines Polaris Lounge at San Francisco International Airport hummed with a quiet, expensive energy. It was a symphony of clinking glasses, hushed business calls, and the soft rustle of designer fabrics. In this curated sanctuary for the elite, 17-year-old Jeremiah J. Evans felt like an astronaut stepping onto a new planet. He sat in a plush leather armchair, a stark contrast to his usual habitat of a worn-out gaming chair in his mother's garage. He wore what he always wore, a simple black hoodie with a subtle, pixelated logo of his own company, ConnectSphere, a gray t-shirt, and dark jeans. He looked less like a first-class passenger and more like a kid who'd taken a wrong turn on his way to the food court. This, he knew, was the source of the sideways glances he'd been getting for the past hour. He ignored them, focusing instead on the tablet in his hands, scrolling through lines of Python code with a practiced ease that belied his age. He wasn't just a kid, he was a prodigy. The app he was refining, ConnectSphere, was a revolutionary social integration platform that had, in the space of 6 months, been acquired by one of the largest tech firms in Silicon Valley, Innovate Corp, in a deal that had made him a millionaire before he could legally vote. His destination was New York City. He was the keynote speaker and guest of honor at InnovateCon, the biggest tech summit of the year. He was set to receive the prestigious Marcus Thorne Innovators Grant, an award that came with mentorship from the legendary CEO himself. This flight, this first-class ticket, it wasn't a splurge. It was part of the prize package, a symbol of a world he had just unlocked. He checked his boarding pass for the 10th time. Flight AE 412, SFO to JFK, Seat 2A, Group 1. The letters and numbers glowed on his phone screen, a digital confirmation that this was real. His mom, a nurse who worked double shifts to keep them afloat for most of his life, had cried when she dropped him off. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong there," she had said, her voice thick with pride and a hint of worry. "You earned every inch of this, baby." The call for first-class boarding echoed softly through the lounge. Jay packed his tablet, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and walked towards the gate. He felt a nervous flutter in his stomach, a mix of excitement and the familiar, low-grade anxiety of being a young black man in a space where few looked like him. He presented his digital pass to the gate agent, who scanned it with a polite, impersonal smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Evans." Walking down the jet bridge felt like crossing a threshold. He stepped into the hushed, immaculately clean cabin of the Boeing 777. The first-class suite was even more impressive up close. Polished wood finishes, seats that looked more like futuristic thrones, and personal screens the size of his laptop. He found Seat 2A, a window seat, and slid into its luxurious embrace. The leather was cool and smooth. He stowed his backpack and looked out the window at the bustling tarmac, a wide grin finally breaking across his face. He'd made it. A flight attendant moved through the cabin, offering pre-departure drinks. She was a woman in her late 40s, with meticulously styled blonde hair, and a smile that seemed permanently affixed, though it didn't quite reach her sharp blue eyes. Her name tag read, Karen Miller. She served the man in front of him, a portly executive in a tailored suit, a glass of champagne with practiced grace. When she reached Jay, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her tone shifting from warm to neutrally efficient. "Just a ginger ale, please," Jay replied politely. She nodded, her eyes flicking from his hoodie to his seat number and back again. She returned with his drink, placing it on the small table without a word before moving on. Jay shrugged it off. He was used to being misjudged. It was the tax he paid for being young, black, and successful in a world that didn't expect him to be. He put in his earbuds, queued up a playlist, and settled in for the flight, dreaming of the speech he would give in New York. He had no idea that his journey was about to be terminated before it even began. The cabin doors were still open, and the last of the passengers were trickling in. Jay was engrossed in a technical article on his tablet, his ginger ale untouched, when a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Karen Miller standing in the aisle, her arms crossed and her professionally pleasant mask replaced by a stern, impatient frown. "I'm sorry, sir," she began, her voice low but firm, clearly intended only for him. "But I think you might be in the wrong seat." Jay blinked, momentarily confused. No, I don't think so. I'm in 2A. First class is only for passengers ticketed for this cabin," she said, enunciating each word slowly, as if speaking to a child or someone who didn't understand English. Her eyes scanned his casual attire with an air of undisguised disapproval. "Coach seating is in the rear of the aircraft." A hot flush of embarrassment and anger crept up Jay's neck. He took a slow breath, remembering his mom's words. "Don't let them make you feel small." "I know," he said, keeping his voice calm and even. "My ticket is for this seat, 2A. Karen's lips thinned into a straight line. The polite facade had completely crumbled, revealing a bedrock of suspicion. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass, please." The request wasn't unreasonable, but her tone was anything but. It wasn't a routine check, it was an interrogation. The man in the suit across the aisle, who had been loudly discussing quarterly earnings on his phone, fell silent and watched with undisguised curiosity. Jay felt the eyes of the other first-class passengers turning towards him. He was no longer an anonymous traveler, he was a spectacle. He unlocked his phone and pulled up the digital boarding pass, holding it out for her to see. "Here you go, Jeremiah Evans, seat 2A. Karen squinted at the screen, holding it closer than necessary. For a moment she seemed thrown off, as if the clear, undeniable evidence contradicted a fundamental law of her universe, but the disbelief quickly hardened back into suspicion. "Sometimes there are glitches in the app," she said dismissively, handing the phone back. "These mobile passes can be unreliable. Do you have a paper copy?" "No, they didn't print one at the counter," Jay said, the edge of frustration now creeping into his voice. "The app is fine. You can check your manifest if you want. My name is on it." "Sir, I don't have time to check the manifest right now. We're preparing for departure," she snapped, her voice rising in volume. "The fact is, this seat is a $5,000 seat, and it's highly unusual for someone—" She paused, gesturing vaguely at him, "to be sitting here without a valid ticket." The implication hung heavy and toxic in the air. "Someone like you." "I have a valid ticket," Jay insisted, his own voice rising to match hers. "I'm traveling for a conference. My ticket was booked by my company." "And what company would that be?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcastic disbelief. "Innovate Corp," Jay said, the name feeling like a shield. Karen actually scoffed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Innovate Corp? Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and move to the back of the plane. We can sort this out once we're in the air. But for now, you are holding up our departure." "I'm not moving," Jay said, his voice now cold and hard. Humiliation was turning into defiance. "This is my seat. I paid for it. Well, my company paid for it. I'm not going anywhere." Across the aisle, a woman with silver hair, who had been watching the exchange with growing alarm, finally spoke up. "Excuse me, I think you're being terribly unfair to this young man." Karen shot her a venomous glare. "Ma'am, please stay out of this. This is an airline security matter." "Security? He's just sitting there," the woman retorted. Ignoring her, Karen focused back on Jay, her face a mask of authoritarian fury. "Sir, this is your final warning. Either you move to an available seat in economy, or I will have you removed from this aircraft for noncompliance." Jay stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. Every stereotype, every warning his parents had ever given him about navigating the world in his skin was coalescing into this one awful moment. He had done everything right. He had worked hard, achieved the impossible, and earned his place. And yet here he was, being treated like a criminal because a flight attendant couldn't reconcile his face with his seat number. "I'm not moving," he repeated, his voice quiet but unshakable. Fine, Karen hissed. She turned on her heel and marched swiftly towards the cockpit. You've made your choice. Jay watched her go, a cold dread settling in his stomach. The hum of the cabin had been replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence. Everyone was watching him. He felt like he was shrinking, the spacious, luxurious suite suddenly feeling like a cage. He had won the golden ticket, only to have the gatekeeper slam the door in his face. The return of Karen Miller was swift and decisive. She wasn't alone. Flanking her were two burly gate agents, their expressions grim and businesslike. Behind them, the captain stood in the doorway of the cockpit, his arms crossed, his face a mask of weary authority. He had clearly only heard one side of the story, Karen's side, and had made his decision. Sir, the captain said, his voice brooking no argument, my lead flight attendant has informed me that you are refusing to show a valid boarding pass and are occupying a seat you have not paid for. I am ordering you to deplane immediately. Jay's jaw dropped. That's not true. I showed her my pass. It's on my phone. My name is on your manifest. Just check it. We don't have time for this, the captain said, his patience visibly thin. We have a schedule to keep. The decision has been made. Please collect your belongings. The two agents moved into the aisle, their physical presence an unsubtle threat. There was no room for negotiation, no court of appeals. Judgment had been passed. He was guilty until proven innocent, and there was no time for a trial. Defeated, Jay slowly reached for his backpack. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders. He could feel the stares of dozens of passengers boring into him. He avoided their eyes, focusing on the simple mechanical act of zipping his bag. As he stood up and shuffled into the aisle, he caught a glimpse of Karen Miller's face. For a fleeting moment, he saw a flicker of triumphant satisfaction in her eyes. It was a look that said, I knew it. You didn't belong. As he began the long, quiet walk of shame back towards the open door of the plane, a passenger in seat 4C, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, held up her phone. She wasn't being subtle about it. The red recording light was clearly visible. You should all be ashamed of yourselves, Sarah said, her voice clear and steady, narrating for her camera. I am on Etheria flight 412 to JFK. I just watched this flight attendant, Karen, and this captain eject a young man from his paid-for first-class seat because she refused to believe he belonged here. He showed her his mobile boarding pass, but she wouldn't accept it. This is blatant discrimination. Karen whirled around. Ma'am, you are not authorized to film on this aircraft. It's a little late for that, Karen, Sarah replied, not flinching. The gate agents flanking Jay tensed, but their objective was to get him off the plane, not to start another confrontation. They ushered him forward, past the rows of silent, watching faces in business class, through the curtain into the economy cabin, where confusion rippled through the passengers. Whispers followed him down the aisle. What's going on? Did he do something? They're kicking him off? Finally, he was at the door, the cold, stale air of the jet bridge a stark contrast to the climate-controlled cabin. He stepped out of the plane without looking back. One of the gate agents followed him. You'll need to speak with customer service at the Etheria desk to sort out your ticket, the agent said mechanically, before turning and retreating back into the plane. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing with finality. Jay stood alone on the jet bridge, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. The roar of another plane taking off outside filled the silence. He was supposed to be on that flight. In 5 hours, he was supposed to be in New York, preparing for the biggest moment of his life. Instead, he was here, ejected and humiliated, all because of the color of his skin and the style of his hoodie. He walked numbly back into the terminal, the bustling energy of the airport feeling alien and hostile. He found a quiet corner and sank into a hard plastic chair, pulling out his phone. His hands were shaking. He had a dozen missed calls from the InnovatCon organizers, wondering where he was. He didn't know what to tell them. Then a new notification popped up. It was a tag on X, formerly known as Twitter. He clicked it. The video was already there. It was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. It was from Sarah Jenkins' phone. The caption read, "Shame on Etheria Air, kicking a young black man out of his paid first-class seat on Flight 412 SFO JFK. The flight attendant, Karen, decided he didn't look like he belonged. This is disgusting." Etheria Airlines, Daudararm flying, while black, butchered discrimination. He watched the 10-minute clip, a spectator to his own humiliation. He saw Karen's condescending tone, heard his own frustrated pleas, and witnessed the captain's dismissive verdict. He saw himself walking down the aisle, the image of a defeated suspect being perp-walked. Then he looked at the view count. It had been posted less than 15 minutes ago. It already had 50,000 views. And it was climbing, fast. A torrent of comments flooded in below the video. Cancelled my Etheria card. Done with them. This is 2025. How is this still happening? Fire Karen immediately. Etheria Air. This kid handled this with more grace than I would have. Hope he sues them into the ground? A small, fierce spark ignited in the cold pit of his stomach. They had taken his seat. They had taken his dignity. But Sarah Jenkins had given him a weapon. The story wasn't over. Karen Miller may have won the battle on the plane, but she had just started a war she couldn't possibly imagine winning. The internet does not move at the speed of business. It moves at the speed of outrage. Sarah Jenkins's video wasn't just a spark, it was a detonation. Within the first hour, the view count on X crossed 2 million. Major news outlets, smelling blood in the water, had ripped the video and embedded it in breaking news articles. Justice 4J and Etheria Air on Fire were trending worldwide, eclipsing news of international summits and celebrity scandals. Every refresh of the page showed a geometric explosion of shares, comments, and furious reactions. By the time Flight AE412 was somewhere over Nevada, Etheria Airlines was no longer just a company. It was a global villain. Its carefully curated image of luxury, service, and inclusivity was being systematically dismantled, 140 characters at a time. Inside the Etheria Airlines corporate headquarters in Chicago, a gleaming glass tower that represented stability and power, panic was beginning to set in. Richard Sterling, the airline's CEO, was a man who lived by metrics and margins. He saw the world through the lens of a quarterly report. He was in a budget meeting when his chief communications officer, a harried-looking woman named Brenda Walsh, burst into the boardroom, tablet in hand. "Richard, we have a 5-alarm fire," she said, her voice strained. She placed the tablet on the polished mahogany table. On the screen was the viral video of Jay's expulsion. The executives huddled around, their faces morphing from confusion to horror as they watched the scene unfold. "Who is this flight attendant?" Sterling demanded, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "Karen Miller, a 22-year veteran," someone supplied. "And who's the kid?" "We're still trying to confirm his identity," Brenda said. "The gate agents just filed a standard, non-compliant passenger report. It's vague, but it doesn't matter who he is. What matters is that millions of people now see us as a racist organization." Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "Get our social media team on this. I want a statement out in 10 minutes. Standard protocol. We are aware of the incident, taking it seriously, conducting a full investigation. The usual." "Richard, I don't think that's going to work this time," Brenda warned. "The usual sounds evasive. People are demanding action, not platitudes." "Just do it," he roared, "and get that flight attendant on the phone. I want to know exactly what happened from her perspective before we land." The statement, when it was posted, was exactly as bland and corporate as Sterling had ordered. Etheria Airlines is aware of a video depicting a passenger interaction on Flight AE42. "We are deeply concerned by what we see. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. We are conducting a thorough investigation and will take appropriate action. We are reaching out to the passenger to apologize for his experience." The internet tore it to shreds. "Deeply concerned? You should be bankrupt," one comment read. "Reaching out to the passenger? You kicked him off the plane. You know exactly who he is," read another. "This is a non-apology apology. We see you, Etheria Air, and we're not flying with you." The backlash was immediate and brutal. Celebrities with millions of followers shared the video, denouncing the airline. Rival airlines subtly fanned the flames with tweets about their own commitment to diversity and welcoming all passengers. Corporate clients, who spent millions annually with Etheria, started calling. their legal departments expressing grave concerns. The fire was spreading from the court of public opinion to the realm of actual revenue. Meanwhile, back in San Francisco, Jay was no longer alone. The InnovateCon organizers, after seeing the video, had dispatched a car to pick him up and take him to a luxury hotel. They had already booked him on a red-eye with a rival airline. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages of support from friends, family, and complete strangers. A prominent civil rights attorney, Charles Morgan, had already reached out, offering pro bono representation. Jay sat in the quiet hotel room, watching the news on a massive flat-screen TV. His face was on every channel. Pundits were debating the incident, dissecting every frame of the video. He saw his own face looking lost and humiliated, and felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie about someone else. But it was real, and the consequences were escalating at a terrifying speed. What had started as a single, ugly confrontation in the quiet of a first-class cabin had become a digital tsunami, and it was now hurtling towards Etheria Airlines' gleaming tower in Chicago. Richard Sterling thought he was dealing with a PR problem. He had no idea he was dealing with an extinction-level event. The most important viewer of all had not yet weighed in, and his reaction would turn the crisis into a catastrophe. Marcus Thorne, the founder and CEO of Innovate Corp., was not a man who enjoyed surprises. At 55, he had built a global tech empire from the ground up on a foundation of ruthless efficiency, data-driven decisions, and an almost fanatical belief in meritocracy. He was a titan of the industry, a man whose pronouncements could move markets and shape the future of technology. He was also a black man who had shattered every glass ceiling placed above him, and he had a long memory for the slights and obstacles he'd faced along the way. He was in his minimalist top-floor office in Palo Alto, preparing for InnovateCon, when his own head of PR, a sharp young man named David Hayes, forwarded him an email with the subject line, "Urgent." The email contained a link to the viral video of Jay. Marcus clicked play. He watched the grainy footage, his expression hardening with each passing second. He saw the flight attendant's smug condescension. He saw the captain's unthinking complicity. And he saw a brilliant, promising young man, his award winner, the future he was trying to build, being publicly shamed and discarded. When the video finished, he was silent for a full minute, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle pulsed. "Get me Richard Sterling at Etheria on the phone," he said to his assistant, his voice dangerously calm. "Now." While his assistant scrambled to make the call, Marcus pulled up a file on his computer. It was a contract, a massive, game-changing contract that had been finalized just last week and was waiting for his signature. It was a 5-year exclusive partnership with Etheria Airlines to handle all of Innovate Corp's global corporate travel. With over 80,000 employees worldwide, Innovate Corp was one of the most lucrative corporate accounts in the world. The deal was valued at an estimated $2.2 billion over its term. It was a coup for Etheria, a stabilizing force for their future revenue projections, and a deal that Richard Sterling had personally courted him for months to secure. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Sterling on line 1 for you, sir." Marcus picked up the phone. "Richard." "Marcus, good to hear from you." Sterling's voice boomed, falsely jovial. "Listen, I know why you're calling. It's about this unfortunate video. I want you to know we are all over this. It's an isolated incident, a terrible misjudgment by one employee, and I can personally assure you—" Marcus cut him off. His voice was like ice. "Richard, do you know who that young man is?" There was a pause on the other end. "We're still confirming the details," Sterling stammered. "His name is Jeremiah Evans," Marcus said, his voice low and precise. "He is 17 years old. He is the creator of the ConnectSphere platform, which my company acquired for 8 figures 3 months ago. And he was on that plane because he is the keynote speaker at my conference tomorrow and the recipient of my company's highest honor, the Thorne Innovators Grant. He was flying on a ticket that my company paid for." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Marcus could almost hear the blood draining from Richard Sterling's face. The PR crisis had just morphed into a corporate nightmare of an entirely different magnitude. "Marcus, I had no idea," Sterling finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. This is, this is horrifying. We will issue a formal apology to him, to you, to your company. We'll fire the flight attendant, the whole crew if we have to. We'll make this right." "No, Richard, you won't," Marcus said calmly. "You can't. You had your chance to make it right on the plane when your captain could have taken 30 seconds to check a computer screen. Your company's culture allowed this to happen. That one employee felt empowered enough to make a judgment based on a kid's skin color in his sweatshirt, and your captain backed her play without a second thought. That's not a one-employee problem, Richard. That's a systemic rot." "Please, Marcus, let's not be hasty," Sterling pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. "We have a contract." "We have a document," Marcus corrected him. "A document that I have not yet signed. I was going to sign it this afternoon. Consider it null and void. Innovate Corp will not be doing business with Etheria Airlines. Not now, not ever. We will be taking our $2 billion elsewhere, and I will be issuing a press release to that effect in 1 hour." $2 billion, Sterling choked out. "Marcus, you can't. It'll kill us. The market will react to the consequences of your company's actions," Marcus said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "You allowed your employee to publicly humiliate a young genius who represents the very future my company is built on. Now you get to explain to your shareholders why that decision is going to cost you billions." "Goodbye, Richard." Marcus Thorne hung up the phone. He looked out the window at the sprawling Silicon Valley below, a landscape he had helped to shape. He had built his empire on identifying and nurturing talent, regardless of its packaging. Karen Miller and Etheria Airlines had just spit on that principle. They had made the colossal mistake of judging a book by its cover, not realizing that book contained the formula for their own destruction. The digital tsunami was about to become a financial apocalypse. The press release from Innovate Corp landed like a precision-guided missile. It was brutally concise and written in the cold, unsparing language of corporate execution. For immediate release, Innovate Corp terminates partnership negotiations with Etheria Airlines, Palo Alto, CA. Innovate Corp announced today it has ceased all partnership discussions with Etheria Airlines, effective immediately. This includes the cancellation of a pending multi-billion-dollar corporate travel contract. The decision was made in light of the deeply disturbing events on Flight AE412, involving the discriminatory and unwarranted removal of an Innovate Corp associate. Innovate Corp stands against discrimination in all its forms and will not partner with companies whose values are fundamentally misaligned with our own. The statement hit the newswires at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Time, just 30 minutes before the stock market closed. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. On the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the ticker symbol for Etheria Airlines, EURAAL, turned into a waterfall of red. Automated trading algorithms, programmed to react to keywords like contract cancellation and CEO statements, kicked in, triggering massive sell-offs. Human traders, seeing the Innovate Corp press release and understanding its devastating implications, scrambled to dump the stock before it hit rock bottom. Inside Etheria's Chicago headquarters, Richard Sterling watched the carnage unfold on a massive screen in his office. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in an hour. The stock price was in free fall. In the final 30 minutes of trading, Etheria Airlines stock plummeted by 18%. But the real damage happened in after-hours trading. As the full story spread across financial news networks, Bloomberg, CNBC, The Wall Street Journal, investor confidence didn't just waver, it evaporated. The narrative was simple and damning. The airline's toxic culture had directly cost it the single largest corporate contract in its history. This wasn't just a PR black eye. It was a dagger to the heart of their future financial stability. By 8:00 p.m., the after-hours drop had extended to a staggering 26%. Analysts did the quick, brutal math. Etheria Airlines had started the day with a market capitalization of roughly $16 billion. By the time the dust settled that evening, its value had cratered to just under $12 billion. They had lost over $4.2 billion in market value. Overnight. The number was so immense it felt unreal. It was a figure born from a perfect storm of social media outrage, corporate activism, and Wall Street panic. The cost of one flight attendant's prejudice, one captain's lazy decision, and one CEO's tone-deaf initial response was now quantifiable in 10 digits. The fallout within Etheria was apocalyptic. The boardroom, which had been the site of a mundane budget meeting that morning, was now a war room. The company's top lawyers were on conference calls, trying to assess the legal exposure. The finance department was running damage control models, each one more grim than the last. The communications team was in full-blown meltdown, their pathetic initial statement now a historical artifact of corporate incompetence. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the long table, his face ashen. The jovial, back-slapping CEO was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell of a man staring into the abyss. His phone buzzed relentlessly with calls from board members, major investors, and union heads, all demanding answers he didn't have. He had underestimated everything. He underestimated the power of a viral video. He underestimated the resolve of a man like Marcus Thorne. And, like his flight attendant, he had catastrophically underestimated the young man in the hoodie. He had treated Jay Evans as a nameless, faceless problem to be managed with a boilerplate apology. He failed to see him as a person with connections, power, and the ability to inadvertently bring a corporate Goliath to its knees. Meanwhile, as Flight AE-412 finally landed at JFK, Karen Miller switched her phone off airplane mode. It immediately lit up with a firestorm of notifications, hundreds of angry text messages from friends and family, thousands of hateful mentions on social media. Her photo, name, and even her home address were already being circulated online. A news alert popped up on her screen. Etheria Airlines stock plummets after discrimination incident, loses billions in value. She stared at the headline, her blood running cold. She had been so sure of herself, so certain in her authority. She had been protecting the sanctity of her first-class cabin from an interloper. In her mind, she had been doing her job. Now the world was telling her she had not just made a mistake, but had committed an act of corporate sabotage that would be studied in business schools for years to come. The karma wasn't just coming for her, it had already vaporized the ground beneath her feet. The morning after the nosedive was a day of reckoning for Etheria Airlines. The company was in a full-blown tailspin, and drastic measures were the only way to pull up. The first casualty was Karen Miller. She received a curt, formal call from Human Resources before she'd even had her morning coffee. Her 22-year career was terminated, effective immediately, for gross violation of company policy and conduct detrimental to the brand. She was a pariah, a meme, the face of a corporate disaster. The career she had built her life around was gone, erased by a single prejudiced assumption. Her union couldn't protect her. The public pressure was too immense. She was, as the saying goes, thrown under the bus. But the world knew the bus was one Etheria had built themselves. The second casualty was Captain Henderson. While not fired, he was suspended indefinitely pending a full investigation, his career and reputation in tatters. His failure to perform a simple due diligence check, a 30-second task, had enabled the entire fiasco. But the market wanted a bigger sacrifice. They wanted the head of the snake. By noon, after an emergency conference call with a furious board of directors, Richard Sterling stood before a phalanx of news cameras. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the grim pallor of a man delivering his own eulogy. "I am here today to offer my deepest, most sincere, and unreserved apology," he began, his voice strained. He didn't read from a teleprompter. He spoke directly to the cameras, his eyes pleading. "An apology to Mr. Jeremiah Evans. What happened to him was inexcusable. It was a failure of our policies, a failure of our training, and ultimately, a failure of our humanity. It is not reflective of the values we aspire to, but it is reflective of the reality of where we are. And for that, as CEO, I take full and complete responsibility." He announced the immediate implementation of mandatory company-wide bias and de-escalation training, developed in partnership with leading civil rights organizations. He announced a full review of all customer service protocols. Then came the final, stunning announcement. "Effective at the end of this week, I will be stepping down as Chief Executive Officer of Etheria Airlines. This company needs to heal, and that healing must begin with new leadership." The news sent another shockwave through the industry. Sterling was out. The hard karma had reached the very top. That same day, in a packed auditorium in New York, Jay Evans walked onto the stage at InnovateCon to a thunderous standing ovation. Dressed in a sharp but simple blazer over a t-shirt, he looked out at the sea of faces, the titans of the industry that, 24 hours ago, he feared he wouldn't reach. He stood at the podium, a picture of quiet confidence. Marcus Thorne himself introduced him, not as a victim, but as a visionary. Jay didn't start his keynote with talk of code or algorithms. He started with his story. He spoke not with anger, but with a profound and powerful clarity. Yesterday, I was kicked off a flight because someone decided what I was wearing was more important than what was on my boarding pass, he said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. They judged the cover and never bothered to read the book, and that company paid a heavy price. But this isn't about one flight attendant or one airline. It's about the systems and biases that allow these moments to happen every single day, in classrooms, in boardrooms, and in the first-class cabins of airplanes. He continued, a lot of people are asking what I want. Do I want a lawsuit? A big payout? What I want is to make sure this never happens to another kid who looks like me and dreams of changing the world. Then he revealed the final, shocking twist, a move of strategic genius that no one saw coming. Over the past 12 hours, I have been in direct talks with Marcus Thorne and with the board of Etheria Airlines. And we have come to an agreement. I have asked them, in lieu of any personal financial settlement, to do something bigger. Today, Etheria Airlines has pledged $50 million in seed funding to launch a new foundation, one that Innovate Corp has pledged to match. A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. We're calling it the Ascend Foundation, Jay announced, his voice ringing with passion. Its mission will be to provide scholarships, mentorship, and travel grants for underprivileged youth in STEM. It will create a pipeline of talent from communities that are often overlooked. It will ensure that the next generation of innovators can get to any room, any conference, and any seat they have earned, without question. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Etheria Airlines tried to keep me from my seat, he concluded. Instead, they have just funded thousands of seats for the future. They wanted me to go to the back of the plane. Instead, we are all about to move forward, together. The applause was deafening. It was more than an ovation. It was a coronation. Jay Evans had faced down discrimination and corporate power, not with rage, but with intellect and grace. He hadn't just won, he had changed the game. He had taken a moment of profound personal humiliation and transformed it into a legacy of opportunity. The airline that had lost $4 billion by underestimating him was now inextricably linked to his ascent, forced to fund the very change it had so desperately resisted. The karma wasn't just hard, it was poetic. The standing ovation at InnovateCon was not an ending. It was the starting gun for a race Jay Evans had never trained for. In the 3 months that followed, his life transformed at a dizzying pace. The title of tech prodigy was largely replaced in the public consciousness with reluctant activists. He was no longer just the kid who built a great app. He was the boy who cost an airline $4 billion and then, with astonishing grace, turned their penance into a promise for others. This new crown, however noble, was incredibly heavy. He was still a senior in high school. While his classmates worried about prom dates and final exams, Jay was juggling AP calculus with conference calls to lawyers, accountants, and the newly instated board of the Ascend Foundation. The $100 million endowment was a monumental force for good, but it was also a colossal logistical challenge. For every inspiring story of a scholarship application from a brilliant young girl in rural Appalachia who wanted to learn to code, there were a dozen soul-crushing administrative hurdles to clear. He learned about tax law, nonprofit governance, and the brutal reality that good intentions don't automatically translate into effective action. Marcus Thorne became his anchor in this storm. He mentored Jay not just in business, but in the art of navigating a world that now saw him as a symbol. "They'll want to put you on a pedestal, Jay," Marcus told him during one of their weekly calls. "It's a beautiful view, but it's a very small, lonely place to live. Your job isn't to be a perfect icon. Your job is to build a foundation that outlasts the hashtag." The partnership with Etheria Airlines was a strange and delicate dance. The company had a new CEO, Amelia Vance, a sharp, pragmatic woman in her early 50s, known for her expertise in corporate restructuring. She was brought in to save a sinking ship, and she knew the Ascend Foundation was her only lifeline back to public goodwill. Their first meeting took place in a sterile Etheria boardroom in Chicago. The tension was thick enough to feel. Amelia Vance was not Richard Sterling. There was no false warmth, no blustering apologies. She was all business. "Mr. Evans," she began, her eyes piercing and direct, "let me be clear. My predecessor's leadership was a catastrophic failure. The culture he allowed to fester in this company nearly destroyed it. My mandate from the board is to fix it, not to put a PR bandage on it, but to perform deep, systemic surgery. Your foundation is not just a settlement to us, it is a key performance indicator. Its success is now linked to our survival." Jay, flanked by Marcus, met her gaze. "I appreciate the honesty, Ms. Vance, and for the record, the foundation's success depends on your airline actually changing. We can send kids to the best tech programs in the world, but it won't mean a thing if they get on one of your planes and are treated the way I was." "I agree," Amelia said, nodding slowly, "which is why I want to propose a deeper integration. I want you or a representative from your foundation to have a permanent seat on our new independent advisory board for ethics and inclusion." It was a brilliant move. It wasn't just about giving money. It was about giving up power, inviting the very person they had wronged into the inner sanctum to hold them accountable. Marcus gave Jay a subtle, approving nod. Jay agreed. The partnership was beginning to feel less like a punishment and more like a genuine, albeit tense, collaboration. But as the foundation began to take shape, a ghost from the past emerged. An email arrived in the Ascend Foundation's general inbox, forwarded to Jay by his small staff. The subject line was simple: a request to meet. The sender was Karen Miller. The email was short and devoid of emotion. It didn't ask for forgiveness or pity. It simply stated who she was and that she had a proposal she believed could be of mutual benefit, and asked for 15 minutes of his time. Jay's first instinct was a visceral no. He felt a cold knot of the old humiliation tighten in his stomach. Why on earth would he want to see her? To hear excuses? To be subjected to a tearful, self-serving apology? He forwarded the email to Marcus Thorne with a single question: "What do I do with this?" Marcus's reply came within minutes. "Your anger is justified, Jay. You don't owe her a thing. But my gut tells me this isn't what you think it is. Desperate people can be dangerous, but broken people can sometimes be the most powerful agents of change. Hear her out, in a public place. Let me know when and where, and my security will be there discreetly. The worst that can happen is you waste 15 minutes. The best? You might learn something about the problem you're trying to solve." Jay sat with the advice for a long time. Facing her felt like confronting the trauma itself. But Marcus was right. The mission of the foundation was to fix the underlying problem, and Karen Miller, for better or for worse, was the human face of that problem. With a deep breath and a sense of profound trepidation, he replied to the email. He agreed to a meeting. The meeting was set for a neutral, anonymous coffee shop in a quiet suburb, halfway between San Francisco and Jay's hometown. It was a place with no memories and no significance. Jay arrived early, choosing a small table in a corner, his back to the wall. He felt a nervous energy thrumming under his skin, the same fight-or-flight instinct he'd felt on the plane. As promised, two of Marcus's plainclothes security guards sat at separate tables, looking like ordinary patrons scrolling on their phones. Karen Miller arrived exactly on time. The woman who walked through the door was barely recognizable. The perfectly coiffed blonde hair was gone, replaced by a shorter, unstyled cut that was mostly gray. She wore no makeup, and the harsh lines of stress and exhaustion were etched deeply around her eyes and mouth. The crisp, authoritative Etheria uniform had been replaced by a simple, worn-out sweater and jeans. She didn't look like a villain. She looked broken. She spotted him and hesitated at the door, as if gathering the courage to approach. Jay gave a short, single nod, and she walked slowly to his table. clutching a faded handbag to her chest like a shield. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice raspy and low. She didn't sit down until he gestured to the opposite chair. "I'll be honest," Jay said, his own voice colder than he intended. "I don't know why I'm here." "I know," she said, looking down at her hands, which were trembling slightly. "I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. That's not something I have the right to ask for. And I'm not here to make excuses. What I did was wrong. It was arrogant, and it was prejudiced, and it destroyed my life. I lost my job, my pension, my house. My kids barely speak to me. I became a global symbol for racism overnight. I deserve all of it." She finally looked up, and for the first time, Jay saw not malice in her eyes, but a profound, hollowed-out shame. "I'm here because I've spent the last 3 months doing nothing but thinking about that single moment," she continued. "Why did I do it? It wasn't just you. It was 1,000 little things over 20 years. It was the pressure, the fear of making a mistake, the constant suspicion you're trained to have for security reasons. You start seeing passengers not as people, but as potential problems. You make snap judgments. You look for things that are out of place. And that day, my tired, biased brain saw a kid in a hoodie in a $5,000 seat, and it flagged it as a problem to be solved. My humanity failed. My training failed." Jay listened, his anger slowly being replaced by a kind of clinical curiosity. This was a first-hand account from the other side of the equation. "So, what's your proposal?" he asked, cutting to the chase. "I read about what you're doing with Amelia Vance," Karen said. "The new training programs, the advisory board. It's all good, but it's corporate, it's theoretical. You need a ghost." "A ghost?" Jay asked, confused. "You need to show those new trainees what the real consequences look like," she explained, leaning forward slightly, her voice gaining a sliver of its old intensity. "You can have experts talk about implicit bias all day long, but it won't hit them until they see what it really costs. I want to be that ghost. I want to speak to every new class of Etheria flight attendants. I want to stand in front of them, with no name tag and no uniform, and tell them my story. I want to tell them, my name is Karen Miller, and I'm the woman who cost this company $4 billion because I saw a teenager's hoodie instead of his ticket. Look at me. This is what happens when you let your worst assumptions win. This is your future if you don't learn to be better." Jay was stunned into silence. This was the last thing he had expected. She wasn't asking for a handout or a second chance. She was offering to turn her own public immolation into a permanent, living cautionary tale. It was a form of penance so raw and so brutally honest that it transcended a simple apology. He thought about the mission, about systemic change. He could spend millions on developing the perfect training curriculum. But what could be more powerful than the living embodiment of failure, explaining exactly how she failed? It was a shocking, unorthodox, and brilliant idea. "You would really do that?" Jay asked, his voice softer now. "Put yourself through that, over and over?" "What else do I have?" she replied with a humorless smile. "I can't undo what I did to you, but maybe I can stop the next me from doing it to someone else." Jay sat back. He saw the path forward, a strange and unexpected one. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about restoration. It was about taking the broken pieces of that day and building something stronger. 2 months later, in a brightly lit training center at Etheria's hub at Chicago O'Hare, a new class of 200 flight attendants sat listening to their instructor. At the end of the module on customer interaction and bias, the instructor paused. "And now, we have a special guest speaker. Her story is now a mandatory part of our training." Karen Miller walked onto the small stage. She looked frail under the lights, but her voice was steady. Jay Evans and Amelia Vance stood together at the back of the room, watching. As Karen began to speak, a hush fell over the crowd of young, eager faces. The ghost had entered the machine, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the airline might actually learn how to fly right. In the end, this story isn't just about a $4 billion mistake. It's a powerful reminder that in our hyper-connected world, the actions of one person can have unimaginable consequences. It shows that true power doesn't always come from a title or a uniform, but from brilliance, integrity, and the courage to stand your ground. Jay Evans' story proves that you can turn your deepest humiliation into your greatest platform. If this story moved you, if it made you think, and if you believe that everyone deserves the seat they've earned, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of justice and incredible karma. What are your thoughts on how Jay handled the situation? Let us know in the comments below.